Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to tackle a really significant topic: how the Vietnam War actually came to an end.
Yeah, it's a period with a lot going on.
Definitely. You sent over a whole bunch of information, and we've sifted through it to pull out the key things you need to understand about why this very long and complicated war finally concluded.
hmm
We're aiming to break down some of the main ideas and events pretty simply so you can get a clear picture of all the different factors involved.
Exactly. Because the end wasn't just like one single event. It was a whole mix of things coming together.
Like what sort of things?
Well, political shifts, what leaders were aiming for, definitely how the public felt about the war, and of course what was actually happening militarily in Vietnam.
Okay, makes sense. Where should we start? Maybe with the key players.
That's good. Let's begin with Richard Nixon.
Right. Nixon. He becomes president in 1969, and boom, he inherits the Vietnam War. That's a massive thing to walk into.
Huge. And his main goal, right from the start, was figuring out how to get the U.S. out of Vietnam.
But not just get out, right? He seemed really concerned about how America looked.
That's a crucial point. He wanted to withdraw, but without it seeming like a defeat, without damaging American credibility on the world stage. It was this idea he later called peace with honor.
Okay, so how did he try to do that? It sounds like a tricky balancing act.
It absolutely was. He was under immense pressure at home. You had massive anti-war protests. The country was deeply divided.
Yeah.
So his strategy had a few key parts. First, he started gradually pulling American troops out, reducing the numbers on the ground.
Okay, withdrawing troops, what else?
He was simultaneously trying to negotiate a peace settlement. And, this is the controversial part, he also authorized secret bombing campaigns in neighboring Cambodia and Laos.
Secret bombings, why there?
The idea was to hit North Vietnamese supply lines and bases that were located in those countries to weaken their ability to fight in South Vietnam. But it was kept secret from the American public and Congress for a while.
Wow. Okay, so Nixon's setting the overall strategy. Who's actually doing the negotiating? That brings us to Henry Kissinger, right?
Exactly. Henry Kissinger, he was Nixon's national security advisor and later became Secretary of State. He was absolutely central to the diplomatic side of things.
The main guy for foreign policy stuff?
Pretty much. He was the lead negotiator, especially in the really crucial secret talks with North Vietnam's Le Duc Tho.
Secret talks again, so these weren't the official public negotiations.
No, these were happening behind the scenes, separate from the more formal peace talks in Paris. Kissinger and Le Duc Tho met privately many times.
And what came out of those secret meetings?
Well, that's where the real groundwork for a potential ceasefire and U.S. withdrawal was laid. These discussions eventually led directly to the Paris Peace Accords, which were signed in January 1973.
The agreement that formally ended U.S. involvement.
That's right. It set the terms for the U.S. to pull out its remaining forces. Interestingly, Kissinger and Le Duc Tho were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for this.
But I remember that being controversial. Le Duc Tho actually turned it down, didn't he?
He did. And the award itself was controversial because, well, the peace didn't really hold. The fighting in Vietnam continued after the U.S. left.
Okay, so Nixon has this strategy, Kissinger's negotiating. What about that policy Nixon introduced? Vietnamization. What was that all about?
Ah, yes. Vietnamization. That was a cornerstone of Nixon's plan to reduce American involvement.
So what did it mean in practice?
Basically, the idea was to build up the South Vietnamese military, the ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, train them, give them better equipment, more funding.
So they could fight the war themselves.
Exactly, so they could take over the main combat operations from the American troops. This allowed Nixon to continue withdrawing U.S. soldiers, which was, very popular back home.
Did it work? I mean, were the South Vietnamese forces able to hold their own after the training?
Well, it allowed the U.S. troop numbers to drop significantly. By 1972, most American ground combat troops were gone.
But the ultimate outcome.
Ultimately, no. It didn't succeed in enabling South Vietnam to defend itself indefinitely. While the ARVN fought hard at times, they often struggled without direct American air power and logistical support. And there were ongoing issues with leadership and corruption in South Vietnam, too.
So when the final push came from North Vietnam later on.
They couldn't withstand it on their own. Vietnamization didn't prevent the fall of Saigon in 1975.
Got it. Let's circle back to that phrase Nixon used, peace with honor. What did he really mean by that, and did he achieve it?
Peace with honor was essentially Nixon's public relations framing for the withdrawal. He needed to end the war, but he desperately wanted to avoid the perception that America had been defeated or had abandoned an ally.
So it was about appearances, partly.
Very much so. He wanted a peace agreement that allowed the U.S. to leave with its dignity intact, suggesting they had achieved their objectives, or at least hadn't simply given up.
But the actual Paris Peace Accords, did they reflect that honor?
Well, that's debatable. If you look closely at the terms, they allowed North Vietnamese troops to remain in South Vietnam.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yes, that was a major concession. The U.S. got its prisoners of war back and withdrew its own forces, which was Nixon's immediate priority. But the agreement left North Vietnam in a very strong position within the South.
So the U.S. got out, but the underlying conflict wasn't really resolved in South Vietnam's favor.
Pretty much. So whether it was truly peace with honor or just peace with a withdrawal, historians still argue about that.
It really highlights how focused Nixon was on managing public perception back home. Which brings us to another term he used, the silent majority. Who was he talking about there?
The silent majority was Nixon's term for what he believed was a large, perhaps less vocal segment of the American population.
Who less vocal than the protesters?
Exactly. He argued these were hardworking, patriotic Americans who weren't out in the streets demonstrating against the war. He claimed they supported his policies, or at least disapproved of the anti-war movement's methods.
So he was trying to say, look, despite the loud protests, most Americans are actually with me.
Precisely. It was a political strategy to consolidate support, to marginalize the anti-war movement, and to create a sense that his approach had broad, quiet backing from everyday citizens.
A way to counter the very visible opposition.
Yes. He appealed directly to them in speeches, trying to rally support for his gradual withdrawal plan and his pursuit of peace with honor.
But while Nixon was trying to manage public opinion, some truly awful things about the war were coming to light, like the My Lai massacre. That must have had a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely devastating. My Lai happened back in March 1968, but the story, with horrific details and photos, didn't break publicly until late 1969.
And what exactly happened for listeners who might not know?
It was an event where a unit of American soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians, women, children, elderly men in the village of My Lai. Just brutal violence against non-combatants.
God, that's horrifying.
It truly was. And when the news came out, it sent shockwaves through America and the world. It starkly revealed the brutality the war could involve and raised deep moral questions.
How did it affect people's view of the war?
It significantly fueled the anti-war movement. Many Americans who might have been on the fence or even supportive were horrified. It undermined the government's narrative about the war's purpose and conduct.
Increased the credibility gap, as they called it.
Massively. It became much harder for people to trust what the government was saying about the war when things like My Lai were happening. It really damaged the moral standing of the war effort for many.
Just a terrible, terrible chapter. Okay, moving towards the very end of U.S. involvement, there were the Christmas bombings. What were those about?
Right, the Christmas bombings. That was officially called Operation Linebacker II, and it happened in December 1972.
So just before the Paris Peace Accords were signed in 73.
Exactly. The peace negotiations in Paris had stalled, talks broke down. Nixon felt he needed to force North Vietnam back to the table and compel them to finalize the agreement.
So he ordered more bombing.
A massive amount. It was an intense 11-day bombing campaign targeting Hanoi and Haiphong, major cities in North Vietnam. B-52s flying around the clock. It was the heaviest aerial bombardment of the entire war.
What was the reaction to that?
There was widespread international condemnation. Many people, even allies, were appalled by the scale of the bombing, especially during the Christmas period. There were significant civilian casualties.
But did it achieve Nixon's goal? Did it push North Vietnam?
It appears it did apply significant pressure. Whether it was the sole reason it's debated, but shortly after the bombing stopped, North Vietnam did agree to resume talks and quickly finalized the Paris Peace Accords in January 1973.
So a brutal final push to get the deal signed.
That's one way to look at it, yes. A demonstration of force intended to break the deadlock.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Nixon, Kissinger, Vietnamization, public opinion, My Lai, the final bombings. If you had to sum it up, what were the crucial factors that finally led to the end of America's war in Vietnam?
It really was a confluence of factors.
Yeah.
You absolutely have Nixon's presidency and his determination to withdraw, coupled with Kissinger's diplomatic maneuvering, particularly the secret talks. That, political leadership was key.
And the policies like Vietnamization?
Yes, Vietnamization was the mechanism for withdrawal, even if it ultimately failed South Vietnam. Then there's the immense pressure from American public opinion.
Which was heavily influenced by things like melee.
Definitely. Events like My Lai, the sheer length of the war, the casualties, the cost, it all eroded public support. Nixon's appeal to the silent majority was an attempt to manage that. But the anti-war sentiment was powerful.
And the military
And the
realities.
military reality, including the final pressure applied by things like the Christmas bombings to get the agreement signed.
Yeah.
It wasn't one thing, but all these interacting forces.
So a complex mix of politics, diplomacy, public pressure, and military actions. And as you said, the Paris Peace Accords got the U.S. out, but it wasn't a lasting peace for the region.
Not at all. The U.S. achieved its goal of extricating itself and getting its POWs home. But the fundamental conflict between North and South Vietnam remained unresolved by the Accords, leading to the fall of Saigon just over 2 years later.
A really sobering end to a long and difficult period. Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a few things to think about.
Good idea.
First, can you explain Vietnamization in your own words? What was the goal and did it work?
Second, what was the real significance of the My Lai massacre? How did it change the way Americans viewed the war?
Third, how did Nixon's strategy of appealing to the silent majority interact with or maybe push back against the anti-war movement?
Fourth, thinking about Kissinger and the negotiations, what role did diplomacy ultimately play in ending America's involvement?
And finally, a tougher one. What do you think was the single most critical factor leading to the end of the war and why? Lots to chew on there.
Definitely. It's crucial to understand these different elements to grasp why the war ended the way it did.
We hope this deep dive helped clarify this complex chapter in history. Thanks for joining us.